Hello, welcome back to the Living Process. My name is Greg Madison. There's been a little break between this episode and the last one, just so that people could catch up if they were interested in listening to all of the episodes. This time, I have the pleasure of speaking with Glenn Fleisch, who is a very well-known focusing-oriented therapist. He began his own work 35 years ago as a psychotherapist, training with people that are very well known, especially in the existential and Buddhist worlds of psychotherapy. John Wellwood, Rollo May, David Michael Levin. And then when Glenn made the move into incorporating focusing more in his work and his own personal growth, he studied with Ann Weiser Cornell, Kevin McEvenue, and Janet Klein for interactive focusing. In this episode, we talk about Glenn's specific development of a whole body approach to focusing, which is quite expressive. It deals quite a bit with trauma. And he speaks about the animistic psychology behind his understanding of how parts of the person actually come alive and have their own intention and unfolding through the interaction in the therapy room. And he gives a lot of really nice examples of how he does that. So I found the conversation, really inspiring and interesting, and I hope that you do too. So here's my conversation with Glenn. So welcome, Glenn.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, terrific. It's nice to talk to you. And you're in California, I guess?
Yeah, Northern California, just north of San Francisco.
Okay. So what I normally start by asking people, and I'd like to ask you, is how did you find your way into the world of focusing and FOT and Gendlin's work and that kind of stuff?
Okay. Would you like the short answer or the whole thing or something in between?
Something in between, and I'll probably ask more about it.
Okay, yeah, I'll give you, because I've been thinking about it since I knew you were gonna, bring this up. So I sort of went through my own history, so real quick, it started back, when I was in my 20s, a couple of years ago. I was in a graduate program, and I didn't really know what I was doing, really, but it was a very interesting mix of sort of Eastern mysticism and Western phenomenology. So I was really fortunate. I didn't know anything about it, really, but I do remember I took a course, and it was by this Heideggerian scholar, right? And he said, I know nothing about psychotherapy, but I do know a lot about Heidegger. So it'll be up to you to weave these in. And okay. And so that was my introduction, and I read Being in Time, right? Which I thought was marvelous, even though I understood almost nothing. But I thought it was a very beautiful story, of the birth of Dasein, right? I said, well, this is like a novel, man. I love it. Well, anyway, during that course and then another one, they were doing a survey of different phenomenological psychology, really. And they had this article by Gendlin, and it was called Experiential Phenomenology, way back when. And I thought, wow, now this is interesting. So that was my first introduction, nothing to do with focusing or even psychotherapy. So then I went through various, explorations in phenomenology by the way, I also was very influenced by David Michael Levin, who you might know or know of.
Yeah.
He's like, he and Gendlin were like my co-inspirations. So I took workshops with him and with many others, Hubert Dreyfus, who you may know of, Rollo May. I was really steeped in this for many decades. This was before focusing, by the way. Or then I was in another school called the California Institute of Integral Studies, which is pretty well known. And I was a teaching assistant of John Wellwood, who you may have heard of. And he was teaching a course called Buddhism and Existential Psychology and Psychotherapy. So this is great. And during the course, Greg, he would do this thing, right? He would say, I've learned this from Gendlin. He was a colleague. So during the class, he would always start with a meditation and with this focusing, right? Which I didn't know focusing, and he said, this is a way you can tap into, your life energy or your spirit or your inner knowing, etc. So that was my second introduction, right? Then I was going through a very rough period personally after that. I had to drop out of school. I was very depressed, was in a marriage that wasn't right for my being and all of this. And I was really struggling. And I remembered that I was looking for a therapist, and I had a therapist, but it wasn't that satisfying. But so I remembered that, and I looked up in this magazine, and they had focusing, right? And it was advertised by Ann Weiser Cornell, and she said, and I said, that's who I'm going to contact. So I remember I went to Ann's house in Berkeley, and I had, 3, 4, 5 sessions individually, right? Which I don't remember the content, but I do remember that it put me in touch internally with a very young place. Mm-hmm. And we began this sort of relationship. And from there, Greg, that's how I thought, this is something different and something special. So that's how I got introduced. So then I went through Ann's training. But, I'm an explorer, as you may know, so I'm always open. So not only that, but then I remember I went to a retreat in California many years ago. And there was this guy named Kevin, who of course, and I saw his interview recently, Kevin and Paul, and Janet Klein. So the main one was Janet Klein with interactive focusing, which I also thought was marvelous. Mm-hmm. And then after that, Kevin would give an introduction to whole body focusing, right? Which I didn't know anything about at all. I loved the Janet Klein, and that interactive process really spoke to my need for connection and dialogue, right? But there was something about this whole body, as you probably have experienced, that was just different. And the first time I did it, at that point, Kevin would stand behind you. He was still like in his Alexander mode. So he would like hover over you, so to speak. And then he would touch your spinal column. So we were standing, and then he touched it at some vertebrae, I forget which one. And then he just said, and then my body started shaking. And he just said, go with it. Just let it happen, whatever wants to happen, And he would be with me, and it was wild, Kevin. I mean, my body just gyrated with this energy and just shaking. And I was like in a trance, really. And so then, he was with me, and he supported. He would touch me occasionally, but just for support. Mm-hmm. And then it was over. Probably wasn't more than 15 minutes or something, 20. But I thought, wow, now this is really different. I like this. Even though I was scared, I was like, wow. For someone who's kind of shy and introverted, this was like, wow, this is great. So then he said something. He said, I really liked how you let go, but I can see you need a lot of work on your legs. That's all he said. You need more grounding. You need to feel like this. Okay. So then the explorer in me said, okay, now I'm going to study with this guy. So I did. I did all kinds of work with Kevin. I actually worked with him individually for about 10 years. And when I could see him in person, and then mostly through, remote,
Mhm.
which was amazing. And then, well, I mean, I've studied with almost everybody. The only one I haven't is really Robert Lee's work, but with Kevin, and then I worked with Lynn, Preston, and others in the therapy community. So all of that is kind of we've woven together in my own personal being and in how I work therapeutically,
Mhm.
Um, and I've also worked with Gendlin, by the way, directly, which was very fortunate. Workshops,
Yeah,
retreats.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, like I did some dream work with him.
Mhm.
And this was what interesting, Greg, because as you know, he had a very engaged presence. But there was also something that didn't quite fit for me, but I didn't know it at the time. And this became a way I sort of diverged philosophically and therapeutically. And I can share that if you'd like.
Well, let me just reflect back to you what sort of the impression I'm getting, partly to check it with you. And then
Mhm.
I'd be very interested in going into what just the point you're just at right now. Um, it's interesting because it reminds me a little bit of my own background in focusing and existential psychotherapy, except
Mhm.
for me, it was the reverse. Focusing was first for me.
Mhm.
And then my training in existentialism, existential psychotherapy, and like
Mhm.
you, the interesting, almost paradox or something of reading Heidegger's philosophy and then being left with the task of seeing, well, what difference does this make in your practice?
Mhm.
There was not a straightforward bridge there. There was a lot of kind of individuals sinking or swimming with that, I think.
Mhm.
The first thing before we get to where well, unless this is where you diverge with Gendlin, I'm curious the process you went through. And you're right, I know many of those names, a lot of them are, really important figures in existential therapy and in the focusing world.
Mhm.
Curious about your experience with the whole body focusing and Kevin, and your experience with Gendlin's version of focusing and felt sensing, because for me, there's some kind of a distinction there as well as
Mhm.
overlap. I'm wondering how you
Mhm.
understood the difference, if you saw a difference at all.
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, I mean, the main difference, as you know, is in your embodied experience, right? So, we could wax philosophically about the differences, but really it's in the mode of engagement,
Mhm,
and the entry point also is different.
mhm.
And as you know, I've taught mostly whole body focusing in the community over decades. And
Yeah.
so that I'm much, more versed in and comfortable with. Um, and, as I said, I trained and worked with Ann quite a bit.
Mhm,
So they sort of integrate, except the difference, I think, has to do with energy, really, if I had to put one word to it.
okay.
Uh, that, Gendlin's work is really about the felt sense of meaning, the felt meaning, right? Meaning. And even
Mhm,
his 6 original steps were sort of how to tease out meaningfulness or significance, right, from what your body is sensing, right? Which is very, very valuable, obviously, and all that. But to me, it misses the quality of energy. And what I mean by that is, if you go way back to the beginning, this is okay. When focusing was first developed, um, as you know, it had to do with a client sort of grappling for something in their embodied experience that wasn't clear, right? Like a word, something. you know, so I'm feeling X, and then they'd say, no, you know, that it's not X, it's more like Y, and oh, it's not quite Y, it's like Z, Z, yeah. And then there's this release, right? So it's a grappling for words or phrases or symbols, right? For the energy, really. So that's how I was introduced to it. However, if you go back to the beginning, there is a whole nother way you could take that same process and extrapolate it, I think, as Kevin did, although I don't think he was aware that that's what he was doing, but it sort of relates to me. So rather than trying to describe in words what you're experiencing, you can actually just let your body show it. So, for example, I've had many clients, I'm sure you have, who do the same, like, oh, it's hard to explain, right? And it's like, oh, it's more like X, and you know, and I say, it's okay. Sometimes we don't have words, but you know what we could do is just invite your body to show what it's feeling or going through. Or even more, let's return to that situation or that scene where that happened. Let's just kind of replay it and see what happens. So well, I was talking to my husband, you know, he doesn't listen to me and I get aggravated. Aggravated. So I would take it to the level and just let your body show that quality. What would it be like? Oh, I feel like this, how's that? And then she got a little scared at the level, you know, but so you can take it right from the beginning and say, it doesn't always mean telling or describing or narrating. That's the narrative voice. You can also invite the embodied voice. Let it come from your embodied direct experience. And that's what whole body work has brought to my awareness personally and therapeutically. And that's how I teach it, really, or show it. Like, you can just let your body go with whatever it's feeling, right? Let the energy unfold. And then as the listener or the therapist, you can also, so it's a different kind of listening or being with. It's also letting your body connect energetically with what's happening.
It sounds,
hopefully not, you know, go ahead.
Yeah, the way you're describing it and also the movements you're making, the impression I get is this doesn't quite capture it, but that it's more expressive, more physically expressive.
That would be right. Yeah.
Yeah. The question I have is, because that still is a little bit different than an experience I've had with whole body focusing. I think I want to check this with you. In ordinary focusing, if I call it that, I'll bring my attention down into my body. I will start with a situation in my life, or I'll start with just what's there. There could be a kind of an aching in my chest. And if I give it space and if I just gently stay with it and allow it to begin to sort of inform me, often I'll get an image or a memory or something starts to come and I start to feel, first of all, that it has meaning, as you said. And then sometimes I get a sense of what that meaning is about. It's something about somebody asking me to do something or whatever, it is. And I can go through that focusing process. And I can do that more or less sitting still. You know, a couple of deep breaths, maybe tears will come, maybe laughter, something like that. But that's one version of focusing. The whole body version of focusing, there's the one that you're describing, and then the one that I want to describe, and I'm curious about the difference here, if there is one. The one that I want to describe is, again, it might start just by bringing my attention into my body, or it might start with me talking about something and realizing, ooh, there's a feeling there. I go to the feeling and I give it space, but what I'm attending to, unlike in the first example, isn't necessarily a felt sense. It could simply be a tension, a tightness, something like that. And if I stay with it, often oh no, let me say that differently. If I stay with it and if I'm grounded enough in my body so that I have a sense of kind of my whole body and its grounding and
Mhm.
this place of tension or whatever it is, often well, this is what it feels like to me, which is a strange way of saying it, I know, is it
Mhm.
feels almost as though I'm saying to some force inside of me, all right, you take the wheel. And I take a step back and things start happening, like my head starts moving, parts of my body start kind of coming alive, and it's a
Mhm.
much more physical, and I'm not immediately aware of the meaningfulness of it. It's so physical and sometimes even painful. Only
Mhm.
afterwards does the meaning either begin to fill in, or do I just feel that was very meaningful? I'm curious what you make of that. Is it the same as the kind of experience you were
Mhm.
describing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. In other words, when Gendlin would say, take what's happening in your shoulder, for example, and put it in the middle of your body, I never really resonated with that very much. I'm not
Yeah.
even sure what. Yeah, because there's a lot, if my shoulder starts moving and I just say, wow, this is happening on its own.
Mhm.
I'm not doing it. It's just awakening, coming alive. And then and I often do it personally and with clients too. I just wow, this is weird. Just let it happen. There's life there. There's energy. Yeah. And then
Mhm.
it starts moving and then other things come. Right. Exactly. It's like a little thread and it keeps awakening more and more
Mhm.
and then people, or I would say, well, I don't know how to describe it, or I don't know. It's okay. It's just consider it something in you, an inner force, an inner one that's awakening to something. And yeah, then it unfolds. And I will often mirror, as you probably would, just the energy. And so, because that helps me feel it in my own body.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
sometimes I have a client, uh, many people who just do the sitting often reach an impasse or a stuck place where nothing more really comes, because of that kind of sedentary posture.
Yeah.
So I've had many huge awakenings just by saying, we can stand, just let's you and I stand together. I mean, Greg, it's incredible what happens, right? I'm sure you've had that. One woman was going to stop therapy because of that. I said, it's okay if that's right for you, but let's just stand, and and that just was like the same thing. Her body just started gyrating. This was over many, 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 many months. And someone who was really like, this is all relating to trauma, by the way, in the background. You see, and I think I mentioned I'm also very interested in animistic psychology and perspective, but it all relates,
Mhm.
because in animism, every movement, everything can be seen as if it's a living being. And that living being has its own consciousness, its own spirit, its own life. So you let it so this woman would do that over and over and over. And then it would morph into, oh, I feel like my body's like releasing a straitjacket that it's always been in, like this.
Mhm.
And that's what we mean by it's energetically happening. It's not
Yeah.
just the knowing about it. It's a living experience, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm with you. That's exactly right. Uh,
So I'm curious, is this what you were referring to as kind of taking a different path from Gendlin's work?
one of them, yeah, that anything energetically in the body or in our awareness has life and can
Mhm.
be allowed to feel it just in the way it comes without having to bring it down into the belly or having to put it in words. I mean, words come, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it's different. That's one difference. Another one, which relates, is his notion, of life forward energy or life forward movement, which
Mhm.
to me felt linear a bit. And to me, as you know, hermeneutically, and it's a circle. So everything in the body almost brings us back to something, you know, to keep circling around over and over, right? Like someone had for example, their body was standing and she said, this is strange. She said, my body feels like it's moving counterclockwise. Oh, so let's just feel that. Yeah, it's like taking me back, you know, it won't let
Back
me
in
move
time.
forward because it's wanting me to go back to something. Another client would look this way and that way, and the same thing. He said, I want to go to the future, but something keeps pulling me back. So that's another difference. To me, it's not life forward in a linear model. It's a circular process that the body or the body's life keeps bringing us back to, you know, circling around again and again.
That's interesting. So rather than life forward, a little bit more like kind of life gathering.
Exactly. That's good. Yeah. Or as David Michael Levin said, recollecting. He would call it the body's recollection, which means really recollecting or regathering more and more of your wholeness.
Yes.
And so, as you know, part of trauma is that, especially in early child abuse, neglect, you know, violence, abandonment, is that parts of the self or parts of the spirit or the wholeness get split and are either suppressed or acted out, or, you know. But this is what's remarkable, Greg, and can I just make this one point, that if you not only look inwardly, but you observe what the body is actually doing, the postures, the stances it takes, especially repetitive ones, that often is one of those ways to lead us back without having to speculate. You know, like a client would regularly, when she was talking about a pattern she couldn't break or a habit that was, her body would move into a certain posture like this, right? And this happened over and over, and I was more into the content of what was going, but then I kept being like drawn to the. So finally, one time we stopped and said, you know, your body does this a lot. Can we just gently notice, what is that? Can we stay with it? She stayed with it, and then she immediately flashed back to an experience when she was 3 years old, for example, and her dad was leaving the house for good. She didn't know that, but she was standing at the windowsill, just like that. Daddy, 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 you know, come back. I'm sorry, you know. I didn't mean it. You know, as a little girl, you know, so heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is what we mean, that posture was reflected in current enactments, which were very destructive to her marriage, her life, but the energy, the spirit of it drew us back. And then from there, we could regather that little girl or that little one. You know,
that's very interesting because it does feel, as I listen to you, it feels a little more I'm tempted to say, I think it's the wrong word, but I'm tempted to say almost more holistic. It's like you are willing to take in anything that's happening and use that as the doorway to more that will come, rather than it being a felt sense or necessarily kind of something happening in the body. It can be simply a posture. And that can be the clue to how the body wants to carry itself further. But my question is, and it may be a very difficult question to answer. I'm wondering how you understand that, what have you made of the body's ability to do that?
Now that is, man, I knew you'd trip me up somewhere.
No, it's not meant to be that.
It's a beautiful question. It really is, right? Because that really hinges on not only the practice, but the philosophy, and, you know, something I've been exploring, as I'm sure you have, for a long time. And That's actually where I came to the animistic perspective.
So I thought,
Actually, that, in a shamanic or animistic world, everything doesn't have, let me put it this way, has a potential for spirit, as if.
mhm,
And therefore, it's up to the something else, whether it's you call the shaman or you or me, to engage with that something and help it come more alive. I'll send you, there's a very interesting article written by an anthropologist, and it's called "Is Every Stone Alive?" or something like that, and because that's what he thought animism, and so he went back to this indigenous culture, and he spoke to one of the elders, and he said, "Is that stone alive?" And the elder laughed. He said, "Of course not." You know, oh, he said, "Look at it, it's a stone." He was a little sheepish. Okay. He said, "But wait, that's not the end of the story." He said, "Put the rock in your hand, touch it, feel it, right? Feel that stone, feel the smoothness." And then he kind of guided him through. And then the anthropologist was, "Wow, now I can really feel it." He says, "Now it's alive." And he said, "I've seen stones move in ceremonies and rituals and other things like that." So extrapolate to our body,
mhm.
it's like a stone. It has, we know it has biological life, right? But spirit life needs an other to awaken it, including our own awareness, right? So when you said, in whole body work, we just let the body awaken, right? Move. Well, the way I understand it is we're giving room and permission to allow this embodied energy or spirit to awaken to its own journey, and it leads, it guides us rather than the other way around, right? And
Yeah.
so that's one. And the other is that places in us that have been wounded or traumatized call out, cry out, right, to come back.
Mhm.
And so if you can hear the cry and feel it, that's also like letting something happen that isn't just some random movement, because some people will just say, "Oh, my shoulder's moving, that's weird, I'll stop." But if you sense it as a living being,
Mhm.
so to me, and Gendlin said the client's client is the felt sense, right? And that's not how I sense it. I see that the client's client is this living being, this one inside us that has life, which may have a felt sense, but it's more than that, so that's how I, in a short way, understand it. That it's a awakening back, and as you know, if we won't get into this probably, but in the study of phenomenology, hermeneutics, and existentialism, there's the hermeneutics of retrieval. It really means that coming back to deeper and deeper origins, or primordial awareness or awakenings, right, above the surface level. So it has that quality also, that
It's one of the things that feels important to me. This is kind of a side note, is just in hermeneutics and phenomenology, those methods can unfold quite conceptually.
Mhm.
And I think what you and I are both wanting to add is something that is much more than conceptual. It's this living process, whatever you want to call it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
um
But let me ask
Part
just one more question,
Sure,
just
of
to go
course.
back to what, because I want to make sure not to lose this, because it's one of the burning questions for me, and maybe you have an answer for it. Is
I'm sure I do.
is it why do you think it is? If I understood you correctly, and this is my experience as well, there's something that you might say almost magical about awareness, bringing awareness to the body
Mhm.
allows the body to come alive in some way. It doesn't typically come alive until it's attended to. in a particular open, kind of gentle or permissive kind of way. Why do you think that is? What is the magic of that combination of awareness and bodily being?
Mm-hmm. Another simple question, Greg, right? Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think many in the focusing community and many others will recognize that's so, right?
Yes.
Um, I would go beyond just not just awareness. It's awareness, but it's also engagement.
Yes.
You see, like,
Mm-hmm.
so,
It's not indifferent awareness.
no, that's right. And so when you and I are together, we create a field, and that field is really informs us, not really you individually or my body, but we body forth, if you will, a field together. And it's in that field that something then can feel or sense something that allows it to come forth or awaken. Like if it's a shy energy, and then you yourself are embodying permissiveness, not just saying it, but really authentically conveying that, hey, it's perfectly all right. We have a shy place. It doesn't have to be not shy. Just really embrace that shyness. So that's what we mean by gathering. It's like you're taking in more and more, or coming back to more what we might call your deep nature, your true nature, your dispositions, your qualities of being that are really unique to you or me, So the awareness not only gives it permission, but it also creates a space where it's allowed to come forth and shared, right? You know what I mean?
So it's something about the spaciousness of bringing awareness that allows an unfolding to happen, potentially.
Yes, you observe it, right? So that your observational skills are important. So it's not just inner, but also letting the whole thing unfold, like you said, not interrupting so much with questions or even reflections, unless they're warranted. But that deepens that circle. But also, I've used this notion of letting things play out like that, and that adds a quality of that we're in some kind of play out, play act together, So, like with Renee, who you interview, when you have humor and you have like spirit, it just sort of just brings something forth, right? One quick thing there, it reminds me, my real deepest mentor is Socrates, and I love not so much the Socratic method, really, but the being of him, if we could say that. The idea was that he saw himself as a midwife, right? Called the Mayutic method, midwife. And that really took to me quite a bit, that maybe our journey is to bring forth and midwife, if you will, or bring into being or life latent qualities. So you see, that also means that there's no particular form, that he would say for every soul there's a midwife, which means there's a particular way that you and I interact that allows you to come more alive or be together, you see, or to inhibit it, And so it's in that shared space that, that not only awareness, but attunement and how much of your own beingness you share with the other, right?
And
so it's not a distance.
Yeah, I'm assuming that if we were to take that into psychotherapy, you would probably say that there's a different form of therapy, to some extent at least, for each client.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the principle that's important, not the form.
Yes.
The principle, you could say, is, the foundations of focusing, of whole body work, of Mayutics bringing to life, really engaging in a way that allows them to come. But the form of it, for one person who's more intellectual, it might be you have discussions. And
yeah.
there's nothing with the body per se. For another one, it's the opposite. It's all embodied connection. You know, or the tone of your voice, or everything has to match. That's right. That's another, I guess, quibble I have. If focusing gets too formulaic and is just following, you know, then it loses that spontaneous engagement. That is, I think the whole body work is brought, as you said, to our attention much more. You know,
And also, I guess I'm thinking that perhaps in the focusing, if we have witnessed something be effective and we start to teach it as an effective move that a listener might make, for example, um, it it can start to become a little bit, as you say, formulaic. And it can become, there's a funny kind of knowing that can creep in. It's like, oh, I kind of know what works in this situation. And although that, you know, maybe that can be very helpful at particular times, I think we sacrifice a larger unknowing kind of attitude, maybe, that can take us into more expansive territory where we actually start discovering potentially aspects of being or aspects of bodying that really challenge our assumptions of what a person is. And focusing can be used in that more slightly deconstructive way, almost as well, I would say an existential inquiry into really what is, rather than only a therapeutic method. I'm wondering what you make of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as we know, the therapeutic process is a very, you know, obviously sacred and deep form of this larger exploration of our own beingness in the world. So yeah, absolutely. And there was something you said that escaped me for the minute, but yeah. Oh, I know, the unknowing. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Very. You know, there was a psychoanalyst named Bion, who you might know, who often would say, you know, I enter each session without memory or desire, which means I'm just open to what comes. Yeah, that sense of not knowing means also that we allow this deeper, whatever we want to call it, the spirit, the soul, the energy, the life force, to come forth in whatever way it might need or show us, right? Beyond our own sort of conceptualization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let me ask one question on that before maybe we get back into more kind of well, I've got a couple of sort of therapeutic questions as well. But I'm wondering on that sort of topic of allowing whatever you want to call it to kind of almost to guide us during the session. And that experience that sometimes, for me at least, can feel as though I'm being animated, as Jean said a couple of times, life is living us, and it has that quality of being lived rather than me living as though I'm at the wheel kind of thing, but more I'm in the back seat and the car is coming to take me somewhere else, and sometimes that I don't even know where we're going. My understanding of all of that has changed over time as I've been challenged through this practice to having to loosen some of my beliefs. So that's my question. I'm wondering with you, over all of the years that you've been engaged in this practice and perhaps other similar practices, have you found that your understanding of yourself or of therapy or of life has evolved?
Yeah, I could say no, but that would sort of ruin the whole mood. Yeah, absolutely. You know, part of my own inner nature, Greg, is a wanderer, an explorer.
Yeah.
I used to do it when I was younger, much more physically or the world, but now there's always something more that emerges,
Yeah.
But yes, there is this quality of again, I call it like the turning of the wheel, or the great circle of being, if you will. That our body is the embodiment of the most current form of, let's say, of our being, which is only temporary. Well, even you said me at the wheel, there's a me at the wheel, and then I sort of surrender that, move to the back seat. Yeah. Yeah. And that me is often our socially constructed me, my egoic me, my worldly persona, whatever. And then there's this other me, right? Which isn't really a me. It's, when we say a being, it doesn't actually mean, it doesn't even have to have form or shape. It's a quality. It can morph into a form, but it's I call it, a spirit, a being that has, that reveals something more of me, more than I even do. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, like, for example, I've gone through two or three major life crises here personally, and what it's done is it's awakened a much deeper vulnerability and sensitivity, So that's the one, like, in the, would say, in the driver's seat. And when I do it, Greg, just so you know, is if I feel something like a vulnerability, like a scared place, we call it, instead of doing it in the adultified voice, oh, there's a scared part of me, just welcome it, which is fine. But what I do is I actually go into it, or I allow myself to surrender to that place, and I animate it, or let it animate itself in its own voice. So it's like, I'm scared, like that. I really let it come in a very, very embodied, what if, like, I had to go for a procedure where I thought I might have had a tumor, and this place was just hanging. And so I just let it, so what have we done? I was terrified. I went into really crying, lots of terrified feelings in its own voice, the energy. And then the other me, it was just like, hey, it's okay, little one, you just cry. And they always told me that I shouldn't cry, I should be strong. That's okay. Here we can be whatever, like that. So yeah, they're not only latent capacities, but to really live them out, to let them merge, gives it such a palpable feel.
Yeah. Again, I'm struck by the expressive quality, almost like it reminds me a bit of psychodrama. It reminds me a bit of how Renee might work with children. It reminds me a bit of sort of dream work. It has much more that creative allowing that I think is often missing in, traditional psychotherapy, one might say. So I'm curious, do you, this is the one therapeutic question I wanted to ask. I'm conscious of time, and there's so much in what we're talking about. Would you be quite self-disclosing with clients? Would you bring your own process in as a part of the process of the session, or would you keep this space between you and the client sort of clear in some way, whatever that means?
Yeah, another excellent question, Greg. Yeah, again, it could be both, and it often is. Remember, we said earlier, there's no one form. So for some particular client or our field, staying clear is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
Not putting anything or very little of my own, just gentle, I'm here
Mhm.
with you, honey, and I often use in terms of endearment, but only again if it's right.
Mhm.
I'm here. However, there are many times where yes, I am very disclosing. Um, Either in just mirroring the body feel and then playing that back and sharing it back. Like, wow, as I do that, I can really feel in my own process. I've had that too, something that's just ready to scream.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, man, I feel it. So that kind of disclosing. And then there are times, if it's appropriate, I might share some vignette from my own process, which is mostly what I disclose, not so much the details of, you know, my material life. But there are times I might, it, it's really about, again, what will bring something more in our space alive, right?
Yeah.
And uh,
Yeah.
so, yeah, I would do both.
Yeah. It reminds me of what Gene used to say, is that we never know beforehand what's going to carry the process further. We only know after whether it did or didn't. Um, and
But
I'm
I've said that's not always true. You can kind of tell moment to moment if someone like cringes and as Gene would do, right? Oh no, okay. I can see something was off there, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what I was meaning, is that once you give any sort of intervention, you know immediately whether it was sort of on the mark or not. If it starts to kind of close things down, then you have a sense that wasn't the most helpful thing potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm curious, you mentioned, I know we don't have too much more time, you mentioned the animistic quality.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering if that's an area of this work that you're currently developing.
Hmm. Yeah, again, it's a natural unfolding. It wasn't like I got interested in animism. Just it
Mhm.
was more of this quality, Greg, of feeling the aliveness and the potential that any symptom, any posture,
Yeah.
any phenomenon on a body level can be explored as if it were its own living being that has
Yes.
a consciousness and a spirit. And that's kind of what drew me into animism, as well as the animating. In whole body work, I had a whole module that had to do with animating the body's life. So it was already in there, how to bring more energy, aliveness. So, but this adds a quality, of, uh, which goes beyond therapy. And like there's something you had mentioned when I said animism is that pantheism, I think, and it's similar but different.
Yeah. Panpsychic.
Animism, yeah, everything is every entity or phenomena has a unique spirit. It's very unique to that individual or that entity or that object. Whereas pantheism is more like there's a universal spirit
Hmm.
that informs or infuses all of us. So it's not either or, but it's the uniqueness that really speaks to my soul. There's something unique in my own incarnation that
Huh.
wants more aliveness or more life or more to be lived, you know. Uh,
So that's interesting. For you, your sense is when you bring your attention into your body, and if you find, for example, your shoulder is kind of rigid or frozen in some way, and you
mhm,
bring your attention to it, and as we were saying, that bringing attention to that part of the body and giving it space, you can allow it to become more animated, more alive in some way.
mhm.
And your sense is, and this is a question, I'll say it as though it's not, but it is. Your sense is that that frozen shoulder, for example, as it starts to kind of come a little bit alive, just because you're attending to it in this open, perhaps
Mhm.
compassionate way, that is, it's as if it's a part of you that has its own being and its own maybe life story to tell or something like that. Is that right?
Mhm. Yeah,
But it's
that's
a
right.
part of that's this is the question I have is it reminds me like it almost makes a link back to the inner relationship focusing language. It's a part of me. Is that right?
In a way, yes, although I wouldn't use the term part really. Although if we mean it generically, yes, it's an aspect of my being, if you
Yeah.
will, that got frozen here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you let it awaken to its own
Yeah.
aliveness and feel it
Yeah.
in a sensate way, yes, but it's the aliveness that's really the key. It's the energy
Yeah.
that awakens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's interesting because then as soon as I hear you say that back, I'm thinking, if you say it's a part of me, there's something slightly oppressive about the me in that sentence. Whereas the way you're saying it is, it's almost as if it's a little more autonomous than a part of me.
Hmm. I would think that's right.
Yeah.
Another term I use sometimes is autogenous, which means self-generating.
Yes.
Yes, it can be
Yeah.
an energy that, one definition of spirit is it's a surplus, it's an excess of
Mm.
energy that's beyond our conceptualization and has
Mhm.
its own power to resist, to move, to engage.
Mhm.
So if you want to move one way and something pulls the other way, that's autogenetically alive. Sometimes you say it's an annoyance because it's stopping me from moving forward. But
Mhm.
like you said, that me is only a constructed me.
Yeah.
The actual me-ness of my being is all the whole. That's right. So it changes what we mean by me or self, right?
Yes.
We use the term being, which is inner being. Yeah, then it has that quality that it's one aspect that we have to regather,
And
and I learned that from David Michael Levin quite a bit. My work with him was about this notion of gathering and laying out.
mhm. But also, if I go back a bit, when you were talking about working with a client, or even you and I talking now,
Mhm.
even though it's online, that there's this emergence of what sometimes I think slightly too scientifically can be called a shared field. So when you
Mhm.
talk about the me or the being,
Mhm.
um, I guess I'm assuming that the being you're referring to, in this case, the Glenn being, is doesn't stop at the surface of your body. Somehow it extends out into the interaction with me and the room you're in and that sort of thing. Is that right?
Absolutely. In
Yeah.
fact, one quick thing there, Greg, when I was studying animism and then really, in Gendlin's, one of his core principles is interaction first, right?
Yeah.
But that it's a little, interaction typically means something between, right?
Hmm.
Which he says, no, that's the interaction that creates the units, right? Not the other way around. And then you have to go through all that. But when I studied it in animistic terms, they use the term intra-action, which means that our enacting is within something larger.
Hmm.
And it's that moves us, not
Yes.
me.
Yeah.
So I've been using that a lot now more, that there's an intra change or intra inaction in this larger that I awaken to. Yeah, which extends out as
Hmm.
to me and you and to
Hmm.
in whole body work when I would teach it, often we would go into the body, but also notice the environment and the space around you, and the chair you're sitting in, and our space, and space, and all of that. That's right.
And that to me, I mean, I'm so curious about that. I'm at maybe a similar edge to you, although I think you've thought about it a lot more than I have. But I'm at that edge of wanting to understand that. And I think the way that Jean said it, for me, it is an experience of life is living me rather than I'm living life.
Mhm.
But
Mm.
I don't have it any more precise than that. And there's something nice about it not being precise, but I would like to understand it a little bit more.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen. Like it's a kind of understanding that's not Michael Levin has a term he calls the emerging body of understanding. That's
Yes.
his latest incarnation, which is what I like that. It's a body that understands.
Yeah.
And the body lives.
Yeah.
And not the biological body, but
Yes.
embodied men of our beingness. Then it understands.
Yeah.
But I would be curious to explore your curiosity at some point, reverse it, because but that I'm working on a book on the whole body approach to focusing therapy, because I've had years of experience with it. It speaks to me, and then you'll see in there it starts from very small, and then it keeps like more gets gathered into its can, so the animistic part is a late comer to this awakening, and
So I'm curious,
see where it leads from here.
Do you have any idea when that book might be available?
Well, conceptually and rough draft, I have many chapters, so that's one of my own processes that this year I'm devoted to completing that.
Right.
And because as you know, to have something almost frees it from having to carry it around, in your psyche, and so it's over there. Okay, now I can sort of, that's part of that larger field,
There can be a slight experience
some,
of almost shedding something.
And the other part, real quick, because I know we have to end. Part of this engagement in the larger field, whatever we call it, or the space, is that you can use your whole body being as a resource in a much more active and engaged way. So if someone says, I'm carrying this burden, and I don't know, and I say, hey, let's just bring it, you and I can hold it for a while. You don't have to go at it alone. So it isn't just knowing about it. You bring something of your own being to it. Let me share it with you, brother. Oh, no, I can't let you do that. It's my burden. Okay, it's all right. Or, finally, someone gets that, okay, I can temporarily hold it. So that's part of this active engagement, that's more than just knowing about or listening.
Yes.
To me, it adds something, which is part of what I'm bringing into this book, that using really more stories of my own experience, rather than just talking about the client did this and I said this, this is the theory. Many books, as you know, in therapy, they have an idea and then they just show you why their idea is right or their theory or method. But that doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah.
I want to show it as a living process, to use your wonderful naming of this series. That's right.
There's something so immediately evocative, I think, about that kind of bodily enactment as a response to the other person. I can imagine it being so immediately moving in a way that words alone may not always be.
guess the main thing is as I go deeper into my own journey, there's something about engaging with the one, the most vulnerable one, the one that's sort of behind the scenes quite a bit, so to speak.
Yeah,
And so, but that inner one, you can feel it all the time. It's
yeah.
just it's within and beyond. Um, and if you really feel it, that the life in that one,
Hmm.
you know, there's a Taoist practice that's called something like saving the one, and it's really about that. That underneath everything, there's a one.
Hmm.
So keep
Yeah, I
the
find
one
that.
as you. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
beautiful practice, but I
yeah,
feel it like this, you know.
yeah, yeah. I find that very beautiful, and just that idea of looking for and relating to the most vulnerable one in there. I think that's very inspiring.
Yeah,
Thank
exactly.
you so much. I really have appreciated this. I found it very inspiring and thought-provoking.
Well, thank you. Likewise. And I hope in some way or other we can continue this dialogue. I think it would be most fruitful. So
Yeah, that would be nice.
until next time, shall we say?
Yeah, until next time.
Thanks, man. Enjoy your Sunday.
Yes,
Thanks.
you
And
too.
we'll be
Thank
in
you
touch.
very much.
All right. You're welcome.
Bye
Bye-bye.
for now. Bye.